I have some statistics I want to share with you. In 2018 alone, the marijuana industry spent $471,000 on federal candidates. In Since 2022, and throughout the course of the 2024 election, a large multi-state operator named Truvelle spent over $75 million in an attempt to legalize recreational marijuana in the state of Florida. In 2022, 17.7 million people use marijuana on a daily basis. And since the year 2000, up through 2018, $1.56 billion has been spent on funding research into cannabis by the marijuana industry. Now, if you think that these numbers are troubling, it's because they are. We live in not just a capitalist society, but a neoliberal capitalist society, which is rapidly transforming into an oligarchy. One where politicians are bought off by big money, and the truth about medical research and science is often cast under a reasonable amount of skepticism because of the sheer amount of money which is involved in capturing our institutions, such as the FDA, HHS, and so forth. I think it's troubling. Much in the same way that during the Prohibition days, the research which was being funded into marijuana by the government and by prohibitionist groups and doctors' organizations and the like, all of which had political aims, all of which were ideological in nature, created adverse incentive structures on the part of the researchers receiving this funding. The exact same dynamic exists today, where so many of these researchers are being bought and paid for by the opposite industry. The anti-marijuana industry of the past was paying them off, and now the marijuana industry of today is paying them off. The political dynamics exist nonetheless. If the idea that the corruption applied before, it also applies now in this context where over 38 states have some sort of medical program, and half of the states in the country have marijuana for recreational use. And even more states have it decriminalized to some extent. And so this is the kind of dynamic that we're looking at here. Marijuana is here to stay. All of the states, the most populated states, have it legalized, aside from Texas and Florida, which have their own versions of medical programs, and industrial hemp, such as THCA, Delta-8, and the like, are federally legal, and so you can get them in just about every state. This is an extremely popular drug. That figure that I brought up about the 17.7 million doesn't even factor in all of the people consuming hemp products, and so the actual number of daily users is probably higher than what it currently looks like. Literally the only positive thing we've seen on the data front is the fact that there has been more tax revenue for schools and homeless shelters and police and the like, and also the fact that youth use has gone down in states which have legalized recreational marijuana. And those things are good. We basically haven't seen a change as far as impaired driving is concerned, which is also good. But all of these other statistics paint a startling and concerning picture. The fact that over $1.5 billion in research funding has been provided by the industry, and the fact that there are so many daily users, comprising over 10% of the people who use cannabis at all. At this point, outpacing the number of daily alcohol users. I mean, this is concerning stuff. It isn't to say that cannabis, is worse than alcohol or even as bad, but the fact that so many people are using it in this way is a cause for concern. Why? We know that cannabis causes anhedonia in its users when it's used regularly. We know that it most likely lowers a person's IQ. It's possible that those IQ points can be restored if they spend a period of time off of the drug and their brain has finished developing by the time that they started. But in youth, it most likely hinders the development of brains, which is a bad thing. But also, these cognitive tests in the adults are damaged. Working memory, short-term memory, these things, all of these things you see a marked effect with the introduction of daily cannabis use. These things, performance decreases, it worsens. And so when you take all of this in context, as well as with the decrease in REM sleep, leading to people just feeling tired when they wake up like they didn't sleep at all even after they slept for 13, 14 hours, you're getting a pretty scary picture of what can happen to a person. And this is to say nothing of the various people who have had their first psychotic break under the influence of cannabis, which is now more likely to happen than ever, given that many of the people who try it for the first time are under 25, given that the products which this industry is incentivized to produce, because it's what the people want, are increasingly more and more potent, and even introducing synthetic elements like lab-made terpenes and grow practices which introduce synthetic versions of naturally derived cannabinoids. We're seeing a kind of race to the bottom, in the sense that all of these guys are competing with one another to produce a more and more potent product, which is going to have worse outcomes for people's health, at least as far as we know. The problem is, the bulk of the marijuana research that we have deals with relatively non-potent cannabis. This newly, marketed, let's call it new and tasty cannabis, right? To pull a term from the video game series Oddworld, is not well researched. We don't necessarily know what it does to people to be taking these massive, massive doses every single day. And so what we're essentially conducting on our population is a national experiment to find out what will happen with doses that are like this. And you can't exactly put potency caps on the products either, because then the black market will come in and serve the people what they want, because that is exactly what the people want: more potent products. And if the legal regulated market's not providing it, they'll go elsewhere. And so you can't exactly create a gap in the market by giving people the old school bud. You have to go in this direction if you want a legal regulated market that functions. Now, I'm all about people having choices. I believe we should legalize, tax, and regulate all drugs. But it's undeniable that there are certain externalities that come with the introduction of these drugs in society. In an ideal world, they wouldn't exist at all. But it's a known fact by now that the war on drugs has been lost in every country in the world, even the ones that try to market themselves the opposite way. And that the drugs are here to stay. People want them. Some people mistakenly feel that they need them, and so they will get them, no matter what it costs or what they have to do. And so in order to keep people safe, as well as take the funding away from violent organized criminal gangs, we should have federal legalization of every substance, especially cannabis. However, again, that does not mean this is a safe plan. I think it's been proven that while it is safer than alcohol, it's not saying much. It can be safer than alcohol overall and still lead to heart disease, as we've come to realize smoking cannabis does. can still possibly lead to certain types of cancers, can still lower a person's IQ, can still worsen a person's memory, can still give a person anhedonia and greatly increase their risk of addiction. It can still cause developmental problems in adolescence if the adolescent were to get it. And so all of these things should be taken in context, right? If you are a consumer, you should be making an informed choice about what you're consuming. If you're over the age of 25 and you have no family history of psychosis and you have a good job and you're educated and you're aware of the risks, are you going to use cannabis responsibly? Probably, but at this point in time, this information that I'm delivering to you is being suppressed because there is now a very well-funded propaganda apparatus which has been set up by the marijuana industry, which is at this point a multi-billion-dollar industry. And as a multi-billion-dollar industry, they are doing everything they can to capture our health agencies, to put out bogus research that attempts to downplay the risks of the plant and of the risks associated with particularly long-term use. This is information which is being suppressed. And the media has done a terrible job at really covering these things, probably because, to an extent, they're funded by them as well. And that's to say nothing about the politicians which have taken massive amounts of money for these people in order to deliver policies which are more favorable to this industry. And so capitalism is going to do what capitalism does. You know, just because I'm a supporter of legalization, it doesn't mean that I have any delusions about this. You know, I supported putting marijuana in Schedule 3, as the Biden administration has tried to, not because I think it's an actual medicine, not because I think that the science that they used in their scheduling review was correct. I mean, with literally any other drug that they were trying to schedule or reschedule, the science that's utilized would have not passed the smell test. There was not like a single placebo-controlled stage 3 clinical trial that they cited in order to say that this is plant which is called marijuana has been approved as a medicine. Most of it was just anecdotal data from state industries. And you have to ask yourself why. Why did this happen? Why did they put out this rule at HHS? I think the reason is simple. It is because the Democrats, more than any party, have taken money from the marijuana industry, and the party has made certain promises to their voters and their constituents based on that big money which they've received, and the opinions of those voters who believe that there is some medical property to cannabis. When the overwhelming evidence that we have seems to indicate that there's not really such a thing as medical marijuana, right? There's a very narrow, limited set of things. For example, like if you're on chemotherapy, using marijuana, preferably not smoked, but using it in whatever way you do, will make it easier to eat, right? It'll reduce the nausea and vomiting. It's possible that very small amounts of THC, but primarily CBD, will reduce symptoms of like epilepsy. I've seen some evidence to suggest that high amounts of THC can actually trigger seizures in people. And then there was like one other possible disorder that marijuana can help with. I think it was female orgasmic disorder, which I didn't even know was a thing. But I mean, I guess it makes sense. You know, not every person can make women come as easily as I can, so it's hard out there, right? I'm sure there's something to do with reduced sensitivity that some people have as well, but it sounds kind of just like men aren't doing their part when I hear about that disorder. I'm not gonna lie, but you know, if that's a thing, I can see how marijuana would treat that, because you'd be more stimulated and sensitive and aroused. But those are the only things that I've seen like concrete evidence that the plant actually treats. Um, and even with cancer, it's like there's a synthetic form that's already out there that works for people. It's called Marinol, and it was approved by the FDA. So, like, the idea that this is some necessary tool that we need to treat as this medical thing is kind of silly to me. But it's extremely popular because there is, again, an entire propaganda apparatus which has been spreading these ideas first in the alternative media space, in magazines and on television back in the day, and now it's just like a thing that's so popular to think that everybody thinks it. They all know somebody who swears that marijuana has fixed some problem of theirs, and they just haphazardly believe it because they're not doing the research into the actual science. I think this is a huge issue, right? Especially when marijuana is recommended for the treatment of psychiatric disorders. Like, oh my God, you're going to take someone who's depressed or anxious or has PTSD and tell them that the solution to their problem is to drown out their sorrows in drugs? Like, this, I have PTSD, anxiety, autism, and depression. And I don't think that, I mean, maybe I don't have depression anymore. I was diagnosed with depression at one point. And I really don't think that giving me marijuana would fix that problem. In fact, I know that it would make it worse. I've never really been, back when I used to use cannabis, I was never really a daily cannabis user, never, thankfully, experienced addiction or anything like that. But there are lots of people who have. I've personally known many of them. And it's not uncommon for it to happen, right? Over 10% of users is way too many users when you consider just how many people have tried marijuana at some point. So I think the social cost of this is big, and it's, I think, primarily happening because people are unaware of the risks with this drug. Many people are unaware that it even is a drug. And so it's going to take dedicated, informed people coming out there and providing a counter-narrative to the one that the marijuana industry, big marijuana as they should be called at this point, are putting out to the public. I'm all for freedom and keeping people out of jail and generating new tax revenue for the government in order to provide social services. But it is undeniable that there is an insidious component to this industry, and there are lives which haven't been destroyed in the same way that, like, usage of heroin or methamphetamine has destroyed lives. But nonetheless, those lives have been pretty screwed up by cannabis use disorder. The incessant desire to constantly smoke and use this to the point where it makes someone non-functional, right? This is a big problem, and it's crazy to me that more left-leaning people don't bring this up, the sheer amount of money that's in this industry and how it's being used to actively capture our institutions. Because this Schedule 3 thing, like, let's be real here. They did that so that the existing companies could get tax breaks, because with Schedule 2 and Schedule 1 drugs, you can't apply for, I think it's Section 180E relief on your tax forms. And so right now they're paying way more money to the federal government on their taxes each year than other businesses do, than literally any other type of business. It's a handout. It's a gift to them, all this Schedule 3 stuff. But, I mean, that's the way the cookie crumbles in this kind of society and system. I really wish we could have a more nuanced conversation about this because, again, I support people's ability to make their own choices, and I even believe that the drug has had a positive effect on some people and made some people's lives better. But the idea that it is this miracle drug cure-all for so many things, and that it doesn't have a substantial risk of causing younger people to develop schizophrenia, lower IQs, develop anhedonia, and the like, is nonsense. These are all risks with the drug. Heart disease, again, big thing which can happen if you're smoking cannabis. If I recall correctly, I don't want to say this because I'm not sure, but I think I heard that it increases risk of stroke as well. But again, I haven't researched that in as much depth as the other things I've brought up throughout the course of this video, so take that one with a grain of salt. Nonetheless, it's a big problem. And I don't want to live in a society where more and more people are spending all their money on weed and lottery tickets and booze and never getting out of poverty because they're escaping into all of these various forms of conspicuous consumption, and then when they see how bad their life is, taking it out on their wife by beating them. I don't want to live in that kind of country. And I think you can have rational legalization where the schools, the media institutions, and health officials inform people about the acute risks of all of this stuff, while also giving people the choice to use these things. And so that's what I want. But because it is not politically expedient to talk about these risks that I've brought up in this video, they've been largely suppressed in favor of overemphasizing the potential benefits of the drug and putting people in this false reality as a result. People have a false perception of what the drug really does and of how it may affect people because the media and the industry has so painstakingly defined the narrative. They have a relative monopoly on how we even talk about this drug, and it creates it creates a society which is uninformed and potentially at risk because they don't really know what they're getting into when they take that first hit.